Hi, this is John Anderson. Today I've been asked to show you how to log data using a Siemens Comfort panel into a Microsoft Excel file. I was also asked to demonstrate how to take this data and be able to keep it on the panel and then on demand be able to transfer it from the panel onto a USB flash drive. So let me show you the steps that I did to get this done. Alright, let me just talk a little bit about the hardware I'm using. I've got a Siemens TP1200 Comfort panel. It does have a SD card inserted in the back in the data side. I'll try to flip this over here so you can see that. So on the back of the Comfort panel, there is a slot here. If I just slide this open, there's a spot for two different memory cards. I'm using the slot on the left if you're facing the back of the panel here that's labeled data. So I've got an SD card inserted there. It is a Siemens card that I'm using, and that card is a 2 GB in size memory card. And then I also have a USB flash drive inserted because what I'm going to do is log data to the SD card, and what the person has asked me to do is have a convenience port on a control panel that somebody can come along and plug in this USB stick and then on demand be able to move the data that's logged here over to the USB stick. So let me show you how I did that. Alright, this is the front side of my TP1200 Comfort panel. It is powered on, and I just have one screen for this example project. I've got the date time, or actually just the date field here that I can manipulate, because what I'm doing is I'm logging basically 6 pieces of data. They're going to log a part number, a serial number, a pressure, an initial pressure, a final pressure, and then if there's a pressure decay based on the initial and final value. And then the final test result, did the test pass or fail. So I've just got some fields here to simulate what a controller or PLC might do. But these are just internal tags that I'm using on this project, but these could easily be tied to PLC tags. I also have a button to trigger when to log the data, and I also have a couple buttons here at the bottom. One to be able to transfer the data to the USB stick, and then also once the USB stick is inserted and the file system takes control of it, you want to be able to safely remove it just like you do in your Windows computer. So there's a button to do that, to release it from the operating system. Alright, this is my WinCC Comfort project. I'm using WinCC Comfort V13 Service Pack 1. Update 9 is the latest update that I'm using. In the screen section of my development software, I've got one screen called the test data screen, and this is my engineered project over here and my one screen. And let me just talk quickly through the components of it. Besides my screen, I have some HMI tags that I've set up. I've got some test tags here with my test data that I display on the screen for my final pressure, initial pressure. I do have a log data integer value, and after some experience and talking with Siemens tech support, whenever we want to log data, especially from the PLC, it's best not to use a trigger of Boolean, but to rather use an integer value. And what I mean by that is that way we can, in the PLC, whenever we're finished and we want to trigger an event to log my data values into that SD card, I can set an integer value and then look on that value. I can either look to see if a certain value is achieved, or we put a limit on that tag. We might put a limit on that tag from 0 to 8. And so if the PLC sends a value of 10, then I can use the on exceeding property, which is an event, to then be able to run my script. And I do have 3 scripts in this case to log the data, and I'll talk through each of those. At the beginning I had indicated that the data was to be logged to an Excel file. That's not a native function I mean, we can do some data logging into a CSV file just using the built-in logging feature of WinCC Comfort, but in this case we want to have one single header row, and then after the header we want to insert data. So the way that this file is structured is the file's first created, and then if the file is first created, then it creates a header row. So then what my scripts do after that is they check to see, is there already a header row? So if there is, don't repeat that, and then simply just append the data after that. And I've created 3 scripts. You'll see 4 here, and I'll talk about the 4th here in a little while. But the 3, I've broken it out into 3 sections just because I've had other larger projects that this is kind of my framework and allows me to be able to expand this method and use it with other projects. So let's talk about each one. The first one is to check if my test data log folder exists. So in this script, what I do is I actually, and it's pretty simple code. Basically, I'm just looking to see here on my storage card SD, I create a folder called test data. And what my script does is it just looks to see if the directory exists with that structure, and if not, it just simply writes it. And that's all this script does. When data is to be logged, all 3 scripts are called one after the other. So then my next script is to check my test data to see if there already is a header row. So let me just scroll up to the top here. This one's a little more complicated, but it's still not too bad. And what it does is the file that gets written, I put the name of test underscore and then I put the date. And then so if that day multiple tests are run, they're all contained in one file. So that's why I'm checking for date and time, really just the date, to be able to put that in the file name. And then what I do is I check to see if the file exists, and if it does exist, to see if there's a header. And if it's the first time that it runs through and the file doesn't exist, then it simply just writes to the file. So I've got those steps here. The third script then is to actually write the test data into my log file. Again, you'll see some repeat things, and these scripts could probably be consolidated down into one script. But like I said, just from the nature of doing other projects and the modularity of these scripts, that's why I've broken it into 3 scripts. But you could do it all in one script if you wanted to. So you can see I'm just, and some of these steps aren't, I scroll down, I'm looking for my particular file name based on the date, and then if the header file already exists, then go ahead and just write the data that I want. I want the day, the year, the hour, the minute, the second. Then I want the part number, the serial number, and so on. All my fields that I have over on the screen that I showed you earlier. And then I have system messages. I've got a little system message display that I'll talk to you about. But that just gives me feedback as I was developing these scripts, just to make sure everything was working along the way. Alright, my last script is I call the XX copy SD data to USB XX. So let me talk a little bit through this script. This script was a little bit of a challenge just because when you do Visual Basic scripting for the Siemens Comfort panels, some of the instructions don't translate between a PC-based Visual Basic scripting and the Siemens Comfort panel. So if you go into the help file and you simply search for the VB script for Windows CE, and I can expand this out, and I want to look at the Visual Basic script information for the Windows CE panels. And like I said, this is different. slightly different than what you would do for a PC that's running this application. So I use some of the objects here, the create object. I've used the directory. I used the move file. The move file allows me to go through and move every file from the SD card over to the USB stick, because one of the things too that I was asked to do is they basically want to have the data only in one place, meaning once it's logged to the SD card it stays there until it's transferred over to the USB stick, but once it is transferred it is removed from that SD card. Now if you didn't want to move it, you could use what's called the file copy command and do something very similar, but that way it just creates a copy rather than moving the file. So back over in my script, to move the file, what I do is I have created a loop. I go out and I search to see, well, the first thing I actually do is go to check to see is the USB stick inserted. So if somebody tries to press the button to transfer the data and the USB stick isn't there, then it will give me a nice little message indicating that the USB stick's not installed. This is also good if the USB stick is not supported. Maybe it's a really large one and the operating system doesn't support it and doesn't recognize it. At least this way the user will get a message indicating that. So that's my little media check CE. If it is true, then, or 1, then it means that it does exist. And then I can see if the folder structure is created, and if not, go ahead and create the folder structure. And then I do a little loop to see all the files, because the move file instruction that I use has to have an explicit file name. So I go out and I do a directory function and check to see what files are there, grab the file name, then move it, then keep looping through until all the files are moved. So that's what this script does. Alright, so I'm back over at the actual project running on the comfort panel. So what I can do is I can put in different dates here. So let me just back this up, and we'll say today is 12/8. Press enter. Anytime you put an entry into an IO field, press enter. Then I go to the part number section, and we can just make up a part number. Let's just put a part number in there. These are string fields for the part number and serial number. So I could put alphanumeric characters in there. And then the initial pressure, final pressure, and pressure decay here. I've got some initial values that we'll just go ahead and use here. And then I can indicate if the test passed or failed. And like I said, the PLC is probably going to be making these determinations based on the logic. We could do it in the comfort panel if we wanted to. You'll notice a little pop-up I got about the license key not available. I did enable Smart Server for this panel and just have not transferred a license yet. But what this does is allows me to look at the web server and be able to look at the files that are on the memory cards, and it just makes it a lot easier for troubleshooting. So once I get the data in, I can log the data, and you'll see my nice little message, single line. It'll tell me the storage of the data was successful. It gives me a nice little message. I could fail the test, run it again with the same data, the same date. Let's run it again. Okay, storage of the data successful. So now let me go over to my screen here, and I will log into the web server. Alright, to log into the web server, I simply put the IP address of the panel. In this case, it was 192.168.2.1. That's what I configured in my WinCC Comfort project. And the default username is administrator, and the password is admin lowercase. So once I log in, I can go into the file browser, and the storage area that I'm interested in is the storage card SD and storage card USB. So let's take a look at both. Now before I started, this was a blank card, but because I did initiate the log data button that calls my 3 scripts, it went ahead and created a test data folder. And in that folder is my single CSV file. So if I open that, I'll open it with Microsoft Excel, and we can take a look at that. Let me drag this over, and I'll go ahead and expand those columns. You'll see the data that we entered. We made an initial pass test, and then I failed the second one. So we can see the data that's entered. I've got the date, the time, the part number, serial number, initial pressure, final pressure, pressure decay, and test result. Now the one thing I need to mention is that on the comfort panel, stop the runtime and go into the settings of the panel. I need to go up to the regional settings because the default setting is German, and if you use German, the different delimiters come into play, and for the CSV file to function properly, I need to make sure I set my regional and language settings to English United States. So once you set that, you can press the OK button, and then you can simply X out of this control panel to get back into start the runtime again. Now I can come back to my panel, and that one file that we've created, I want to transfer that data from the SD card to the USB stick. So again, you'll see my message window up here, and I've got another indicator here, just an IO field, and what I do here is I actually display the files that are being transferred. In this case I have one, so let me go ahead and transfer that, and then it gives me a nice little message. If you saw that, it said that the files are moved. So let's just verify that they're moved. Let's go back to our web server. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see it. So this was where we were before. We were looking at the SD card test data, but this is a snapshot in time, so let's just move to the system diagnostics area and then back to the file browser just to refresh. So I'll go back into my SD card and my test data. You'll notice the file's missing. So let me just go back to the previous page, back up a little bit. Then I can go to the USB stick now. You'll see now I have a folder that I didn't have before, my test data folder. And in there now is the file that was created originally, that now we moved it from the SD card over to the USB stick. Now once I'm done, I can move back down to the screen, zoom out a little bit. Now when I'm done, I can remove the USB stick, and it gives me a message. The USB can now be removed, so I can simply lift up the panel and take the USB stick with me. When I'm ready, I can put it back in. I want to do it again. So this time we're going to create multiple files. Let's go ahead and put a new date in. We'll make it 12/9/2016. The previous date was 12/8/2016. So on my USB stick, if I have a date that already exists and I try to transfer the data, I'm going to get a message that that file already exists because that date, that test with that particular date is already there. So it's not going to move that file. So whenever somebody wants to transfer data again, they need to make sure there's a new date range, or they've moved the old ones off that USB stick. So let me just enter a part number, a serial number, and let's go ahead and log the data 5 times. And we'll look in my output window just to see that it does get logged. Alright, so it stored it once. We'll do it again, twice, then 3 times. The last 2 let's fail the test. 4 and 5. Alright, let's go ahead and put some more data in so we can do it all at once. We'll change the date to the 10th. Let's change the part number, just something different. And the serial number, something different. And let's go ahead and pass those tests, and let's log that 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now we should have at least 2 files there. So let's go ahead and transfer the data. So back over on my web server, let's just make sure that data got logged correctly. So we go back to our SD card. This is where the data is originally logged. So you can see our 2 files, the one that we created on December 9th, 2016 and December 10th, 2016. So I can open up the data and take a look at it. And there's my 5 entries. I passed the first 3 tests, and then I failed the last 2. And then let's open up the other file. And those all 3 passed. You can see the part number is different, and the serial number from previously. Alright, and now I want to transfer those files. I want to move them from the SD card over to the USB stick. So I'm going to press the transfer data to USB. We'll notice our output window giving us some messages. Alright, the files are moved, so let's actually see if they are moved. So this was a snapshot in time. Let me just move off the file browser back over to System Diagnostics, then back to File Browser. Let's look at the SD card first. That's where we're taking the data from. You'll notice there's no files. I'll go back to the previous page here. Go back again. Let's go to the USB card and the test data. Now I've got all 3 files. I've got the 2 that I created on the 9th and 10th. We'll just open one to make sure the integrity of the data is good. And it is. So that's it. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, just post them below and I'll see if I can answer them. Thanks.